So there's all these conflicts that are coming out within our data that sound like, and I labeled it thus, sci-fi world. So my December report was entitled Science Fiction World because it really is coming down to that. We have data sets that suggest, for instance, that the oil industry that we have now won't exist this way in a few years. And in a few years, oil will simply be too precious to burn, but we won't need it to burn because we'll have what will amount to basically a perpetual energy source that will come from the interstellar solar flux flow around the sun. So it'll be solar energy, but it won't be photovoltaic at all. And so there's all these really cool things that are being described in the data sets, and most of them, insofar as I can see, seem to originate with or be connected to technological discoveries in Antarctica that we are having within the data sets connected both to that fear and to the temporal sense of urgency. Now, this could all be absolute fantasy, okay? This could be an old man sitting out in the woods getting stuff off the weird forums of fiction writers and all these kinds of people on the internet, except this stuff actually manifests. And so the months that I've been talking about Antarctica, we show so shortly after, this was in like 2013, I think, that we really started in on it. And shortly thereafter, Putin goes to Antarctica. And shortly after that, the head of the Russian church goes to Antarctica, and on and on and on and on, with all these people that we've associated with the Illuminati that and the ruling elites that in fact show up in Antarctica. And then even beyond that, we get some weird one where right at the height of what has to be described as the most contentious presidential election in modern history, perhaps in the last 80 or 100 years, one of the key figures in that election, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, who's also the titular head of the priesthood that is the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's also the titular head of the 322 Society with all of its weird, satanic undertones and stuff. On that very day of the election, when he's got so much at stake, he flies to Antarctica. He's going to go look at ice. Exactly. He's going to go look at ice to examine for global warming conditions.
Yeah, right.
It's like, no. That doesn't compute. And exactly, that excuse was so lame as to invite further scrutiny. And then we find out Obama went to Patagonia and probably hopped over to Antarctica, and there's all of these weird connections. And then you start looking at the amount of money invested in Antarctica that is not being reported and the things that are going on there. So, for instance, you find that Antarctica is a no-fly zone. Yet, curiously, if you'll go and look on Google Earth and just creep around the coastline of Antarctica, you find dozens of heliports and landing fields with all kinds of airplanes everywhere. It's like, that's curious. And so on and so on and so on. Now, bear in mind, I've been getting strange stuff about Antarctica ever since those first runs in 1997. I had mentioned some of this stuff to somebody on the radio back in 2001, 2, or 3, and then I was gifted. One day it just showed up unbidden. I got a thing in the mail, in the post, and it was a package of 8.5 by 11 glossy photographs that were taken out of Antarctica in a handwritten note. And this fellow informs me that he had been down there on a climbing expedition, a hike, a sanctioned one. They were told you had to stay in this area. They were given these devices, which were new to him at the time, and they were handheld GPS devices. And they were set out. They went out on their little climb. Only they strayed off of the area that they should have been in, went through a pass in a mountain range in Antarctica that had, I'll try and describe it this way, but the guy said that he's been hiking and up and down in mountain ranges all along the West Coast, mostly all of his life, and he's a fairly old fellow. And he said everywhere you go, you see marks from one hiker to the next, or even for themselves, showing which way they went, marks in the stone, right? So you can find your way back or come back there and again the next time, or know where to depart and so on. And he said, here they are climbing in supposedly no habitation Antarctica, and as they're going through these passes, there's climbers' marks all over these stones. And he says, not just hundreds, but thousands of climbers' marks. And so that had him really freaked out. They come through this little notch in the hillside, and he says, there we are staring at a pyramid. And he said, not just a pyramid, but he said something that would make the pyramid in Giza look small. And up about a third of the way up it is a door. And he says, this door is arched at the top, and he says it's got to be at least 90 to 100 meters high and maybe 40 to 50 meters wide. And they were just hiking towards it, had come down out of the pass, were hiking towards it across this plain when they were scooped up by the British forces and summarily hauled off the continent.
Wow.
But he had photographs that he was able to smuggle out in his boot. And he had those. He was in Europe when he did this. got the photographs developed, made copies, and mailed them to me. And I have a little bit more information from him, not very much. And then, on his death, I'm allowed to say who he is and provide details. But at that point, I don't know that it'll be pertinent because maybe all this stuff will come out before that. Yeah, when you go to Google Earth and you're doing this, you're never allowed to see New Schwabenland. They've blanked that out. So you're not seeing everything. You're seeing stuff that they don't have the time to cover up is basically what it amounts to. Because they won't show you any of the area that the Germans claimed in the 1930s and 40s as their territory in Antarctica. If you go to Google Earth, you're being presented with an overlay image of that area that's just nothing but a big ice block that's taken from the lower quadrant on the photo and then simply replicate it. So they're covering something up in there. So now, do the people that are in Antarctica actually, are they allowed to go over New Schwabenland? Do they know what's going on with the German or the Nazi base there? I don't know. We get some stuff, okay, but it's going to come through kind of weird because what we get is we get an emotional value that is basically like gold on steroids, okay? The emotional value I get for gold has particular emotional components within our multi-dimensional array. And we get those same values. And so what I've come to call this is precious technology because it's not precious metals. It's not a treasure per se. And there are many references to gold. There's many references to gemstones and silver and this kind of thing. But those are all in a minimalistic state relative to the technology that is showing up within the data set. So the data sets are suggesting that we will come out and view whatever has been found in Antarctica as precious technology, and we'll hold it in as high esteem collectively as humans as we hold gold in as high esteem. All of these various different major areas that we're really lacking in, which is, the economics of the energy and an effective medical system and so on. And actually, it was the medical system that was sort of weird because that showed up, I don't know, maybe a year ago, started getting some hints out of the Antarctica sets that we were going to look at some sort of a major rethink. And so actually a lot of the stuff that we see showing up is going to be about how we're all going to have to internalize and re-understand and grapple with who we are as humans in the greater sense of what humanity is and where it is now and where it's come from. So there's a lot of that. So now there's also a lot of the fear sets are going to that. So you can see that there are indeed a lot of individuals that represent the height of the power pyramid at the moment that are very much afraid of what's going to happen to their power pyramid when this knowledge comes out. Regardless of how we deal with that knowledge later on, there's a lot of people that are just afraid of the knowledge itself. There's a broader motivation there, and that broader motivation is the intense self-interest of the people at the top, because they don't want this knowledge to come out because they're instantly disenfranchised. It's like Bitcoin for the mind, if you will, right? So all the bankers in our minds are thrown out because we're suddenly super empowered by the information that comes out of this level of discovery, and it's really fitting. I mean, it's temporally ironic that it's going to occur in the age of Aquarius, the knowledge bearer, and all of this kind of thing, and at the very beginning of that age of Aquarius. So for the next 72 years, and we actually show because I was able to identify in the early days of my work multi-generational impacts as the result of the language, I've got a value in there, and it shows up occasionally. And we're going to have some multi-generational impacts that will go on out at least 5 generations. In my data sets, that's 21 years, so we're looking at a little over 105 years. It'll take us, insofar as the data is forecasting, just to integrate the knowledge that's going to be coming out of this discovery. And that's just, the age of Aquarius, of course, starts off with these first 72 years as we start shifting into it. And that was like as of, I think, last year. I doubt seriously that we've got, as a species, that we've got that time unless we start making some really appropriate decisions now. We wouldn't make 150 years because we've got, we're dependent on agriculture. Our agriculture is under stress. It's failing us now because we've been in denial about the true state of our climate. We're actually going into an ice age in 2015, and was the very first one of significance, but 2016 was the second and basically undeniable winter here in which we lost food crops to the extent that we had to shuffle and redistribute food around the planet. And even so, it had major impacts on the northern states in Europe in terms of the amount of money that everybody had to lay out for food. This is just the beginning. This is not a freak. This is simply the beginning of a long-term trend, and people will ignore it to their peril. So next year, you can anticipate anybody north of latitude 30 will have a certain risk of paying 5 or 10 times what they need to or have in the past for fresh vegetables, because we will have another crop failure on the order of what occurred in this winter in southern Europe. It may strike in the North America next year, or it may strike in Europe again. There's just no way of knowing. It may hit Asia, but we will experience it, and it's just going to be ongoing year after year after year. The real beginning of the ice age can be technically thought of as 2024, with the walls of ice kind of thing not really getting moving until 2030. But we're into it now, and so we've got those number of years to prepare for this. And it's kind of like we need to face it. We need to look at it, get real about it, or we're not going to make it. First effect we'll notice is that your food prices are going to go up, and then you'll notice that their food availability is going to go down. You'll have real trouble sometimes getting particular kinds of food. And then over the course of years, that real trouble getting certain kinds of food will eventually get into a state of real trouble getting any food unless you make preparations for it. And this will be true at an individual level, but it'll also be true at a collective level. It need not be this way. The solutions are there for us. They're easily implemented. What's going to kill us is if we try and maintain our giant base of operations for our food supply for the planet. As long as we try and maintain giant farms, as long as we try and maintain huge outlays for giant machinery to do harvests, as long as we try and maintain the giant collectives to process the food, we are doomed. We won't be able to sustain that over the long term. In the Maunder minimum, which was 400, okay, yes, our data shows an ice age. Yes, the data is shown an ice age from 1997 when I first started putting in started getting results out of the internet. But I started checking on whether or not we could even realistically get into an ice age when all these people started freaking out about global warming and started running around with what I just discerned as the warmest talking points. And at that point, I discovered that no, we can't go into global warming. It's never happened in all of Earth's history. We're facing right now we're in a maximum solar cycle sunspot, and yet we have no sunspots. We're about to go into the solar minimum, which is the 11 years from 2022 onward, and we'll be into a minimum that will be lower than any of the other minimums, probably back to the Maunder minimum, and that was 420 years ago. The Maunder minimum was a period of time of great cold where people could ice skate on all the canals in Europe and all the rivers in Europe. It was that cold every winter. The Germans had to shift from wheat and seed production to under the ground crops just to be able to get enough food to survive. There was migrations of huge levels of people throughout Siberia and Mongolia down into the warmer realm. And this was just a bare minimum. This was not a real ice age per se. And that 420-year cycle is part of a cycle that we're going through now. We're going to go through the same effect, the same things that caused the Maunder minimum are going to cause our ice age at the moment, and that is the movement of Jupiter and Saturn relative to each other is causing the orbit of the Earth to bulge out slightly, because these two planets, which are usually opposite each other, are ever so slightly closer together, and so they're pulling us out of our cycle and adding hundreds of thousands of miles to our orbit, which is going to take us away from the sun, just as the sun, unknown, we have no way of knowing what is causing it, is actually weakening. So our sun is losing its temperature from 5,000 degrees Kelvin, heading down to about 3,000 degrees Kelvin. For us, it'll be about a 60% reduction in overall solar energy, but for the kind of energy that we get to grow plants, it's really only going to come out to about a reduction of about 1/8 of the energy between now and 2030. So over that period, though, that 1/8 of an energy reduction in energy is going to really impact crops, especially at those areas of the planet in the northern latitudes where that energy doesn't come in at a whole lot of strength anyway. So now you might be able to grow crops at, say, 50 degrees of latitude. Maybe you can grow buckwheat or some some hardy plants to get seeds out of. And that's going to change. Maybe we won't be able to grow buckwheat even north of, say, 35 degrees here in a few years just because of the temperature. And wheat will probably be a tropical crop. and not able to be grown outside of the tropics at all, so probably not north of 30. And corn will maybe only be able to be grown in a very narrow band in Central America and someplace in Africa, and that's about it, around the equator, simply because there won't be enough light and the conditions for it. So our corn-based culture is going away. So that's going to significantly impact how well we do, how many people are eating, and how well they're eating. Now, it need not be this way that we make ourselves dependent on these large moves and we can take action on our own and deal with it, but it is something you've got to face effectively. And if you're in sort of in denial by listening to the people that are screaming warming, warming, warming when they're absolutely wrong, and they never present any science and they lie about the data that they present, well, you're going to make inappropriate decisions. Now, why they want to do that is anybody's guess. I don't go into that. I just note that it's occurring and that, oh, by the way, they're wrong. The effective range I've got is on our long-term data that I determined way back in 97 was between 19 months and about, say, 36 to 38 months. So about twice the full range of that, I get some hints. And it's quite accurate to say that as we mess about in the data here, the further out you get, the fewer clues you get as to what's going on. And so within the longer term data, you get to a point where any interpretation simply is just too unreliable because there's just too few words. So no, I don't have an answer to that. There's no melting whatsoever in the North Pole. And in fact, the Russians have got two of their best icebreakers trapped at the moment and won't be able to get them free until we move well into March, and it's been trapped for a number of months. And in fact, the ice levels, in spite of what it's saying here in the Western republics, the USA population and stuff, in spite of all the media you're hearing, there's been no melting of ice in Antarctica in the Arctic that is in any way significant. And in fact, we now have more ice in the Arctic than we had in the 1930s and 40s, which was a very warm period of time for the globe. So we've got proportionally more ice than we had back then. Antarctica has got less ice on one side, but more ice on another side. And the way in which it's developing, the ice that's developing in Antarctica is coming in as floating ice, and it seems to be going off on this one side of Antarctica, and as though it's going to basically creep away from the continent, and it's as though the forces that are making it cold are pulling the ice mass off of the continent per se. That's why I think you have a lot of the pressure temporally showing up now, and why all these people are at the elite are trotting on down to Antarctica, probably because so much of the stuff is becoming exposed just by the melting ice. They realize that they're going to have to deal with some level of disclosure about it, and they're probably really have their knickers in a twist about what they're going to say and to whom. You know, we don't know what these things are for. They're a technology, some form of electrical generation kind of a device, a la the sort of thing that Tesla had done with his Clif towers. And so the idea is, at least from the thinking of these individuals that have speculated at this range, is that what you would do with these pyramids is that you would basically pulse electrical energy up into the ionosphere, and in doing it in such a way, you would create a conduit for that energy to come back down in flow in the form of electricity created out of the ionosphere down onto the pyramids. And so the idea might be that, you're in near the local pyramid in your town and your cell phone's running out, you just go and set it up near the pyramid and let it recharge, that sort of thing. Or, you stick a device into the ground wherever you are and suck the electricity out that the pyramid is pumping into it. So, and there's so many pyramids around the planet. The estimation is that we're talking tens of thousands, and perhaps the oldest one is in Java. Perhaps there's some debate about this because there have been recent discoveries of pyramids in the Polynesian islands, some of which may be the islands. People are maybe living on dirt, basically, that just accumulated around the top of really giant pyramid. And so whatever that technology was, it's not operating now, but we get hints in the data sets that whatever they found in Antarctica does explain this, and at least as we say within the data sets, shows up as precious technology. Now, we do have this stuff coming out, okay, in terms of the data sets. There's suggestions, there are hints that that this is going to be used strategically, that some people know disclosure has to happen, not necessarily about space aliens or that stuff, but specifically about Antarctica, that they've got to disclose some of this stuff, and that some people in the let's say the power structures of the planet are content enough with how things are going that they anticipate releasing this information over this say next few years. So there is that. We do have some hints that they're going to share. Now, some of the hints that we get from this show really interesting things, and you'll appreciate this from the money side of things. And that is that there's some hints in the data as back as far as 6 or 8 months ago that there was going to be what we could call an Antarctic precious technology gold rush, okay? Where corporations instead of people, so it would be like 1845, like the California gold rush, only instead of thousands of people showing up, it'll be thousands of corporations that want to get in on it all. And so that is actually showing as being a good thing for the collective global economy, even though the USA pop and the central banks and all of this are going to cause problems for the next 4 or 5 years. We have this other building trend that will pull us out. So in our data sets, we don't have anything like a third world war. Now, what our data shows, and I wrote about it in this last report, because it's shown, up until this past year, now I've been doing this since 1997. I've had public reports out there more or less since the year 2001. Since in all that time, I've never bothered to screw around with trying to forecast any of the things related to politics or presidential elections or anything, because there was no nuance involved, and it all was, pretty much as far as the data sets, it was just all these people are being deluded into going and voting to pick people that have already been chosen anyway. This time it was different. This election was quite odd. And so this year I commented on it ahead of the election itself, because all of the political stuff had really slid over and become the generalized discussions within USA Pop. And so I started getting involved in the politics end of it in a way that I have never, ever before, because I knew something was up, because we were dealing with a context change here. Context change is where the nature of the language itself shifts as we're going along. So like from immediacy language into more economic activity on the net, or, shorter term language into immediacy language dominating, that sort of thing. And so the language was shifting and I had to react to it. And so I started making some, letting out some of the language I was getting about the elections and stuff. Now, what I found really intriguing is that I've been able to pick up some hints that it will occur to someone within the administration, or has already, I believe, because that's how I pick it up. I think I actually get this information after these decisions have been made and universe decides that this is a real probability of something occurring. And so we start picking up hints of it. But some of the things we're getting hints of is the idea of a third force. And so I phrased it as strategy 3 in this last report. And so it's my supposition, and what the data seems to be suggesting is that sometime, maybe in the midst of our chaos that's going to appear economically over midsummer through fall, sometime in there, it will occur to somebody to release the information about Antarctica as a way of derailing the opposition at that time, as a way of yanking the rug out from underneath their feet and totally changing the nature of the game, if you will, up-leveling the whole game into an entirely different game. So it's as though you're doing Pokemon, and all of a sudden you up-level and you find yourself in, space alien or hunt for space alien progenitors. What we get is the emotions first, okay, because that's how it all works, is through this emotional reduction engine I've got. So I get these quantifiers for the emotion, and then I start tracking down the language and hunting out the language that's actually appearing. So I do get that sense. I get the sense, but rather I see it from a slightly different viewpoint. And that is, I get the sense that they're faced with real problems that they actually have to deal with. And on top of that, they've got these buttheads that are trying to bog them down and derail them and prevent them from succeeding. And the idea at that point is that, oh, well, look, all the buttheads would go away and all their power would be removed if half of all their people suddenly discovered that everything they'd been told was a lie, and that all this new information is factual, and that their entire operating premise for their viewpoint of themselves as humans and all of this stuff on the planet is so profoundly different that all these people are simply going to have to think about this for months, and they'll never ever be able to go back to what they were doing in the past just because it's such a shock. So this would be like the equivalent. I don't know if there's ever been anything in history showing up as what we've got in the data sets relative to the impact at a knowledge level. That's why I keep coming back to the irony of here we are in the age of Aquarius, and everything we've been told is true is going to be upended, and we're going to have to sort through and figure out what really happened, but we know that none of the stuff we've been told was even remotely close to actually how it worked out, or is even remotely close to the reality that we're in. And so the idea is going to show up that the power base, the people causing the problems to the administration later on, when other issues arise, it will just be more expedient to do it then. That's just kind of what we're getting in the way of the data, that it's like, okay, let's just do it now and get it done with. And it'll cause them all kinds of problems. Yes, we'll have to suffer, but it'll at least get these bastards off our back. Reality is a whole lot more amazing than Santa Claus. So we get all kinds of weird stuff within the data sets, and have, especially about Antarctica, in 2003 or 4, sometime in there, started getting hints about a new form of power. And it'd be like an electricity that where you wouldn't have to bother putting wires into your wall or anything. You'll just decide that, oh, okay, the electricity, I want it to come over here, and you'll just tell the device that this is where you get it from, and in some way connect that device to that particular spot on the wall and let them work it out. So the device will get its power and you won't have to be involved in that. So we're talking some really strange changes here about how things are. Plus, I don't want to take anything away from any of the people that actually did the engineering, but I bet you that there were key concepts they were gifted with, and that maybe those concepts are indeed coming out of some of the things that they're finding in Antarctica now. We know, for instance, that we were on a particular path as a species, and that involved heavy investment in vacuum tubes. And all of that changed in 1947. Why? Well, shortly thereafter, shortly before the change, we had a spaceship crash, and that's when we learned about fiber optics, digital technology, and solid-state semiconductors, and we abandoned vacuum tubes as being too expensive. And the solid-state semiconductors were easily produced, and so on. And so our whole technological basis for our society changed in 1947 as a result of that. I wonder how much of the technological basis for our society in 2017 will be so radically changed that a few years from now we'll be able to say, aha, they were leaking this stuff out from Antarctica even then. Okay, so we have some hints, all right, because we're not close enough to enough of these events that they're falling into the immediacy data, and so we're dealing with short-term data, which is usually effective from the beginning of the 4th week away from when we talk about it, out to maybe the end of the 4th month. So we're maybe say, and then the error range is that same 4 months out. So we're looking at maybe something 8 or 9 months away, and so we don't get a lot of details, but we do get some hints of really strange stuff. So and it's odd the way we get the hints, because we have hints of a new form of a let's call it a healing modality, and it'll be new to us, although it'll be based on frequencies, and so it'll be based on sound and light frequencies, the way things like that we've had in the past, Rife technology and these kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm. And but the data sets are showing this as being a big screw up. We have data sets saying that the people down there in Antarctica found a hospital, or what they think is a clinic, I guess. And so they go on into this area. We don't know if it's in a pyramid or if it's under the ice or in an underground facility or whatever, but we just get some data sets saying, discovery of a clinic, medical clinic. And so they just get more and more data. And so it appears that they discovered this, what they think of as a clinic, go on into it, and they discover a database. And so they make the assumption they're looking at patient records, because there's like 300,000 or 400,000 of these records that they've discovered in this digital form that they're apparently able to activate. Okay, this is the hints that are coming out. Now, it could be all spurious, because this could be the half that isn't going to manifest. But nonetheless, there's a fair amount of detail here, so we have a little bit of confidence in it. And so it goes on to suggest, as the fuzzy sets build up, that it's going to take them a while to discover that they screwed up, and it's not patient records. It's in fact a library of frequencies for healing things. And it may be millions of them, because the 300,000 or 400,000 of them are each subdivided. And so the idea is that there's a frequency in there that will shine lights or do some kind of a device that will go across your body to make you not bald, or kill toenail fungus, or grow new teeth, or basically everything short of surgery. And so that's what's going to be described, but it'll take us years to get at that. And what's interesting for us, though, is the data sets are suggesting that in this year, in 2017, somebody's going to get the idea that, oh, hey, maybe this is not the individual records of patients, but maybe this is in fact a modality that you play through that big stone thing over there in the corner. and it'll all sort of happen that way. So the curious part for me, the fun part of this, was that, oh, look, humans have found this, but we're so silly we don't know what we're looking at.